She walked into a world where she didn't belong, or so everyone thought. No degree, no title, just a plain woman with a worn notebook and a mind no one saw coming. Whispers followed her, eyes dismissed her. But what they didn't know was that she had spent years solving problems PhDs couldn't crack. And today she wasn't leaving quietly. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. I stood outside the math building, my hand resting on the cold metal door handle, trying to ignore the reflection staring back at me. Plain blouse, sensible slacks, and a messenger bag that had seen better years. I looked more like a receptionist dropping off documents than someone about to walk into an advanced calculus class. "You can do this," I whispered. Quiet, just loud enough to steady my hands. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. That shift in the air when you don't belong. The hallway smelled like floor polish and copier ink. Students passed in pairs and clusters, all of them younger, dressed in effortless layers that said, "I've always belonged here." They didn't say anything to me. They didn't have to. I followed the printed map clutched in my hand. Room 307. My eyes scanned the signs above the doors until I reached it. The number stared back at me like a final checkpoint. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Her name alone made me nervous. Her textbook sat on my nightstand at home, covered in notes. I'd solve problems from it late at night, just for the joy of it. I took a breath and opened the door. Conversations dipped into silence. A few heads turned, just long enough to scan and assess. Beige top, paper notebook, not a laptop in sight. I walked toward an empty seat near the front. A guy in a gray cashmere sweater leaned away as I sat down, like politeness prevented him from saying what he really thought. "Is this seat taken?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No," without a glance. I placed my notebook down, 3 sharpened pencils, an eraser, familiar tools. I could feel the glances behind me, the whisper trailing like static. "She's in that online program. No degree, just talent, I guess." "What is she, 35? I kept my eyes on the blank page. I'd come here to learn, not to be liked, but that didn't stop my stomach from tightening. Then the door opened. Dr. Blackwell walked in like a storm sealed in a silk blazer. Her posture perfect, her presence immediate. She scanned the room once, and her eyes landed on me. "Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Calculus," and she said. "For those who belong here, this course will push you to your limits. For those who don't—" She paused just long enough. "Tony, the drop period ends Friday." No one laughed. But they didn't have to. I straightened my back. I didn't have their credentials, but I had something else. And I wasn't here to prove anything, except to myself. 20 minutes into the lecture, and I was already scribbling furiously. Dr. Blackwell's voice cut cleanly through the room, every word crisp and calculated. She didn't ramble. She didn't pause. Her teaching was like surgery, precise and intimidating, and I loved it. The way she laid out complex partial differential equations, step by step, made the room feel like a cathedral to logic. I was taking it all in, drawing connections between things I'd learned alone in my apartment and the formal structure she was laying out. Every now and then, I found myself nodding, unconsciously, when a step made perfect sense. "That was my mistake," she noticed. "Something to add, Miss Miller?" Her voice was cold, clipped. The murmurs in the room died instantly. 30 heads turned toward me. My pencil stopped mid-line. I looked up. "No, Dr. Blackwell," I said softly. "I was just following along." Her eyebrow rose. "Indeed. You find advanced dimensional analysis so intuitive, you're nodding as if this were grade school arithmetic." A few students chuckled. Quick, sharp laughs that pricked at the back of my neck. I caught the boy in the cashmere sweater smirking behind his tablet. "I didn't mean—" I began, but she cut me off. "Since you appear so confident," she said, gesturing toward the blackboard, "perhaps you'd like to solve the next problem I was about to present." She moved aside, revealing a dense multivariable equation already written in tight white chalk. The board was a wall of nested functions, derivatives, and obscure substitutions. It wasn't impossible, but it was designed to intimidate. The silence was thick. My heart pounded in my ears. I swallowed. I I don't, as I thought, she said, already turning back to the board. The program may admit those without proper credentials, but some foundations simply cannot be skipped. I felt the burn behind my eyes. Not tears, just heat, embarrassment, frustration. Dr. Hayes, standing off to the side by the window, shifted uncomfortably. Elizabeth, she said gently. No, Patricia, Blackwell replied, not even turning her head. These students deserve to understand the difference between academic rigor and casual enthusiasm. She turned to me again, her stare like frost. Miss Miller, she said, I insist. Show us your approach. The student beside me leaned closer to his friend and whispered, This is going to be a train wreck. I heard it. Everyone did. I closed my notebook carefully. My hands were cold, but not shaking. I stood. The walk to the front felt like moving through water. Heavy. Thick. The board loomed over me, chalk waiting like a blade. Blackwell handed it to me. Our eyes met. There was no malice in hers, just expectation. She didn't hate me. She didn't even think about me that much. She'd just already decided what kind of person I was. I turned to the board and studied the equation. It was a variation of a problem I'd seen in one of her journals, a more convoluted version of a boundary condition problem I'd worked on weeks ago. The structure was familiar. The complexity was superficial. I knew I could solve it. The question was, could I do it here? Now, with 30 strangers staring, waiting for me to fall? Dr. Blackwell's voice sliced into the quiet behind me. Today, Miss Miller. I took a deep breath. The chalk felt cool and dry in my hand. I started with the standard setup, tracing the expected path. Let them follow something familiar. Then a few lines in, I pivoted, substituting in a transformation I discovered on my own. One that collapsed the problem from 15 grueling steps down to 8. Behind me, someone exhaled, soft and surprised. I kept writing. With every line, my confidence returned, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because the math made sense. The math had always made sense. It was people that were confusing. When I boxed the final answer and set the chalk down with a quiet click, the room was dead silent. I turned around. Dr. Blackwell hadn't moved. She approached the board slowly, scanning each line with narrowed eyes. I could see her jaw tighten just slightly. This approach, Dr. Hayes said quietly, stepping forward, it bypasses Peterson's method entirely. She looked at me. How did you see that connection? I clasped my hands in front of me, willing them not to fidget. The equation reminded me of Currar's optimization framework, I said. I used a modified hyperbolic substitution. It simplifies the nested integrals. A student in the front row leaned forward. That's not in the textbook. No, I said. I worked it out on my own, solving similar problems. Dr. Blackwell's lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either, and for now that was enough. I stood there facing the class, the chalk still dusting my fingers. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint mechanical buzz of the overhead lights and the distant hum of an air vent. The tension in the room wasn't just heavy, it was alive, stretching thin and taut like a wire strung across a canyon. Dr. Blackwell took a small step forward. Her eyes scanned my solution, line by line. Her expression didn't change, but her stillness did. She wasn't reading casually. She was hunting for mistakes, inconsistencies, any proof that what I had just done was a fluke. She didn't find one. This method, Dr. Hayes said again, quieter now, almost reverent, it's elegant. I heard a few students shift in their seats, murmurs rising like cautious waves. The boy in the cashmere sweater wasn't smirking anymore. He looked at me like he'd never really seen me until now. And maybe he hadn't. Dr. Blackwell turned her gaze back to me. A creative approach, she said slowly, though unconventional methods often lead to errors in more advanced applications. Her voice was even, but it didn't mask the edge in her tone. Not quite praise, not quite rejection. A warning, perhaps. I nodded once. Understood. I walked back to my seat, not looking at anyone, not needing to. I could feel the shift. The students who'd scoffed or whispered earlier now watched me with something more complex in their eyes. Not just surprise, but uncertainty. Recalculation. The seat beside me, the one the boy had leaned away from, was now half turned toward me. He didn't speak, but his posture said enough. You changed something. I took a breath and opened my notebook again. My heart was still racing, but my hands were steady. The silence didn't last. Before we conclude today, Dr. Blackwell announced 30 minutes later, her tone clipped and rehearsed, I'd like to introduce a more challenging problem, one that demonstrates the limits of intuitive methods. Her chalk tapped briskly against the board as she wrote. A sprawling multidimensional integral unfolded before us, dense and tangled, with what looked like a degenerate boundary condition tucked inside. Her eyes flicked toward me. Perhaps Ms. Miller would like to demonstrate her technique again. It wasn't really a request. It was a challenge, a test designed not to reward, but to undo. I felt the eyes turning toward me again, but this time something had changed. The weight wasn't suspicion, it was expectation, even curiosity. The boy next to me leaned in, and for the first time whispered, Good luck. Before I could answer, Dr. Hayes stepped forward. Elizabeth, we only have 5 minutes left in the session. Blackwell didn't blink. Then perhaps Ms. Miller can make the most of it, unless she feels the challenge is beyond her capabilities. A trap, and we both knew it. I stood anyway. She handed me the chalk, her fingers cold and smooth against mine. Our eyes met again, but this time I didn't see dismissal in hers. I saw calculation. She was still watching, but now she was measuring. I turned back to the board. The problem was difficult, but not for the reasons it appeared. The initial structure was misleading. Any student rushing in would fall into a mechanical dead end. It wasn't designed to be solved conventionally. It was designed to expose the limitations of shortcuts. But I didn't need a shortcut. I needed to see what was underneath. I let the first lines play out, carefully, deliberately, before pausing mid-sentence. Chalk hovering. There it was, a hidden symmetry, a faint pattern buried beneath the noise. I switched coordinate systems, reorienting the variables. Gasps, soft and involuntary, rippled behind me. I worked quickly but not carelessly. The clock was ticking down and I knew I wouldn't have time for explanations. But I didn't need to talk, I just needed the board. The steps unfolded like water running downhill, natural, inevitable. I boxed the final answer just as the room's wall clock clicked to the top of the hour. Silence. Again. Only this time, it was different. Dr. Blackwell walked up to the board, heels echoing across the room. She traced the lines of my work, one finger hovering just above the chalk. Her face was unreadable. That's, Dr. Hayes began, stepping closer. That's brilliant. You recognize the embedded Jacobian transformation. Her voice carried something that hadn't been in it earlier. Awe. Blackwell's jaw flexed. A creative approach, she repeated, her tone thinner now. Class dismissed. Chairs scraped, backpacks zipped, but no one rushed to the door. They lingered just a moment longer, glancing between the board and me. As I returned to my seat, a girl in the second row leaned across the aisle. How did you learn that? Like, without training? Before I could respond, someone else asked, Could you explain that last substitution? I didn't expect the crowd, but suddenly I was surrounded. The same students who had whispered about me now waited, wide-eyed and silent, wanting to hear how I'd done it. I had no answer for them, not yet. But something inside me, something long buried, was starting to believe what I'd never dared to before. Maybe I really did belong here. I don't know what I expected when class let out. Applause, number gratitude? Not likely, but I didn't expect the silence. Not the kind that comes from awkwardness, but something else. Reverence, maybe. Confusion. Realignment. The students who had barely acknowledged me an hour ago now lingered in small groups, glancing in my direction as if I might turn back into the person they'd assumed I was. As if they were trying to reconcile two versions of me in their heads. I sat back down at my desk, heart still steady from the rush of solving that last equation. My notebook sat open, untouched since I'd left it. But something was different now. The boy next to me didn't lean away this time. In fact, he leaned slightly toward me. That was wild, he said, scratching his head. Seriously, how did you see that symmetry? I would have been stuck at line 3. I gave him a small smile. It's something I've been experimenting with for a while. I didn't expect it to work here. He nodded slowly. You do this often? Mostly at night, alone. I paused. It's kind of how I unwind. Before he could respond, Dr. Hayes approached my desk, her expression warm and unmistakably sincere. Ms. Miller, she said gently, could I speak with you in my office? I believe we need to revisit your position in the program. Behind her, Dr. Blackwell was packing up her things with a kind of mechanical sharpness that made the buttons on her blazer seem like armor. She was pretending to be composed, but her movements were just a little too exact. We locked eyes as I stood up. I thought she might leave without a word. Instead, she changed direction and walked straight toward me and Dr. Hayes. Her voice was formal, controlled. Miller. Yes, Dr. Blackwell. Your performance today was unexpected. Not praise, but not a slight either. Thank you, I said simply, refusing to shrink, refusing to gloat. She continued, her tone measured. That second solution, the Jacobian transformation you applied, that's not covered until graduate-level theoretical mathematics. May I ask where you encountered it? I didn't, I said. I derived it. When I was working through the third edition of your textbook, the standard approaches felt inefficient. Her brows lifted, slightly, the first visible crack in her otherwise impenetrable demeanor. For a breathless second, she really looked at me, not as a woman in the wrong classroom, not as a mistake, but as a mathematician. I see, she said at last. She nodded, short and sharp, and turned away, her heels tapping down the hall like punctuation marks. Clean, controlled, and just a touch too fast. Dr. Hayes watched her go, then turned to me with a half smile. Coming from Elizabeth, she said, that's practically a standing ovation. We walked together toward her office. Students passed us in the hallway. Some looked twice. Others offered quiet nods, like a wordless apology for their earlier dismissal. One student, a lanky guy in a Northwestern hoodie, stopped just briefly beside me. There's a study group on Thursdays in the Commons, he mumbled. We could use someone who thinks like you. He didn't wait for my answer, just stuffed his hands in his pockets and kept walking. I blinked, caught off guard by how casually inclusion could be offered, after a lifetime of having to carve my way in. I'll think about it, I murmured. When we reached Dr. Hayes's office, she gestured for me to sit. What you did today, she said, was more than impressive. It was disruptive, in the best possible way. I smiled faintly, still processing. Most of the time, I said, I just see patterns. Numbers make sense to me when people don't. That's a gift, she replied. One we'd like to support. I'm going to recommend a shift in your status, from audit to formal track, with a scholarship. You belong here, Sarah, whether Blackwell is ready to admit it or not. I looked down at my hand, still faintly marked with chalk. Belonging. That word had always felt like a door I wasn't allowed to knock on. And now here it was, open. When I finally left her office, the math building had quieted. Most students had moved on to their next class or wandered outside into the sharp chill of the afternoon. I descended the stone steps slowly, the sunlight casting long shadows on the path ahead. At the bottom, I saw her again, Dr. Blackwell heading across the courtyard toward the faculty lot. She didn't see me at first, but then our eyes met across the space. There was no smile, no wave, just recognition. Not as an outsider, not as an anomaly, but as a peer. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of that glance settle. It didn't erase the sting of her earlier words. It didn't undo the judgment, but it marked something far more powerful. Respect, not freely given, but earned. And I could live with that. The next morning I returned to the same lecture hall. Same floor, same glass doors, same dusty portraits of men in gold frames watching from above. But this time, something was different. The heaviness in my chest was gone. I didn't feel like I was trespassing anymore. I wasn't here to prove anything, not to Blackwell, not to the students, not even to myself. I was simply here, and that was enough. As I entered the room, a few heads turned, not with suspicion this time, but with familiarity. One student raised a hand in a subtle wave. Another nodded politely. No fanfare, no spotlight, just quiet acknowledgement. The boy who'd once leaned away from me now made space. "Hey," he said, "glad you came back." So was I. I took my seat, opened my notebook, and sharpened a pencil, listening to the low hum of conversation around me. Dr. Blackwell entered moments later. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She'd already seen what she needed to see. She launched into the lecture with her usual precision. I followed along, focused but calm. My notes flowed naturally now, less out of fear, more out of joy. I had always loved math. Now I loved that I didn't have to hide it anymore. After class, I passed by her desk. "Dr. Blackwell," I said. She glanced up. "Ms. Miller." Our eyes met. She didn't smile, but she nodded, just once, and somehow that was worth more than a standing ovation. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the stone steps. I sat for a moment, letting it soak in, flipping through the notes I'd taken. My phone buzzed, a message from my coworker at the insurance office. "How's your math adventure? They speaking in code yet?" I smiled. "Not just code," I replied. "I think I might be rewriting some of it." I stared at the message for a second before hitting send. Rewriting. That was the word. Not just equations. Expectations. People like me weren't supposed to sit in rooms like that. We weren't expected to challenge norms, to outshine tradition. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe the reckoning isn't about revenge. It's about redrawing the lines of what's possible. As I walked to the bus stop, backpack slung over one shoulder, I passed a girl sitting alone on a bench, flipping through a calculus book far too advanced for most undergrads. She looked up briefly, our eyes met, and she smiled. Shy, uncertain. I smiled back. She didn't know me. But maybe someday, someone like her would walk into a room like that and not feel like an intruder. Because I had already been there, and I had stayed. Not all heroes wear capes. Some sit quietly in classrooms where no one expects them to belong, until they prove otherwise. Sarah's journey reminds us that the most powerful changes often begin in silence, where passion meets persistence. This is more than a math story. It's about the quiet fight for recognition, the courage to step forward, not to be seen, but to be understood. In a world that too often judges by credentials, appearance, or background, stories like Sarah's reveal how unraveled fates can reshape what we believe is possible. If this story touched something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to rise, to be heard, or to belong. These are the kinds of emotional stories we tell, real, raw, and human. Stories that unfold slowly, but stay with you long after they end. Follow us for more narrated stories that stir the soul, challenge expectations, and honor the people who rewrite their own fate, one step at a time. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest truths,